When a country is invaded by insurgents and more than 200 people are terminated, what are superpowers supposed to do? Usually, people anticipate helping and showing sympathy in return. But when a comparable catastrophe happened in Burkina Faso, the world did not only say nothing, but also did not demonstrate any compassion. Rather, Burkina Faso was criticized by the West for evacuating Western military bases from its territory. Russia's involvement in Mali, where the military government employed the Wagner Group to fight in Russian mercenaries and militants. Yet in Burkina Faso, where French-supported efforts have struggled against, who's really in charge of Burkina Faso's chaos? And who benefits from this unrest? Let's investigate. Burkina Faso is in severe pain, and hardly anyone pays attention. Before the West determines that the misery of the Burkinabe people warrants more than a cursory glance, how many more lives must be lost? The West did not waste any time in pursuing its interest once it became public knowledge. It would not stop talking about how Burkina Faso needs the West and how it has failed to defend itself. But was this the right moment to make such an offer of partnership? Recently, a well-known associated organization ruthlessly murdered close to 200 people in the town of Bar-Holago. This horrific episode is a part of a larger pattern of violence and neglect that has afflicted the area for many years. It is not an isolated incident. Why does the globe show such unity in the wake of an attack on Paris? However, there is utter quiet when Burkina Faso experiences a tragedy of comparable or even greater proportions. Why doesn't the world stop when about 200 people are massacred in Bar-Holago? Why isn't the scope of the catastrophe reflected in the media coverage? In response, we need to comprehend the geopolitical forces influencing attention around the globe. The West has always been adept at picking and selecting which conflicts to highlight. The West has less interest in Africa, particularly in a landlocked nation like Burkina Faso. There aren't any eye-catching headlines, poignant advertisements, or Jesui hashtags dominating social media. The reason behind this is the question. The value that the West places on various lives holds the key to the solution. Conflicts in resource-rich or strategically significant areas receive media attention, but other conflicts, like Burkina Faso, go unreported. This isn't a coincidence. It's an option. In Burkina Faso, the situation is terrible. The worst thing is that a lot of authorities say the West was responsible for certain earlier strikes. Regarding France, even the president expressed this opinion. Was this then a setup? If not, why is the West still uninterested? How come it lacks empathy? Considering that the story doesn't suit their needs, Burkina Faso's violence is still a side concern because it has no direct bearing on government stability or Western economy. Global powers actively choose to disregard what does not favor their immediate interests. Thus, the neglect is not just passive. However, why is this focused attention important? It matters because it determines who gets to live in peace at the end of the day, where international pressure is applied, and where resources are allocated. The West is making a strong statement by neglecting Burkina Faso. The lives of Africans are not as valuable. The selective blindness of the West goes beyond what is reported in the media. It has to do with the deliberate underfunding of humanitarian aid and African peacekeeping operations. Think about the financing differences between missions in the Middle East and Africa. Underfunding and undermanpowering of UN peacekeeping operations in Africa is a persistent problem, making them unable to deal with the intricate web of violence across the continent. In contrast, all resources were used and no expenditure was spared during the NATO deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. The disparity is obvious. There's also a psychological component involved. For a considerable amount of time, the West has had a rescue complex about Africa, seeing itself as the kind outsider who will come in to fix all of the continent's issues. However, when the crisis does not serve Western interests, this narrative breaks down. There are no large-scale rescue operations or urgent calls to action in Burkina Faso. Rather, there is a deafening silence, a refusal to recognize the human cost of the situation. Not only is there a lack of coverage and response, but the story is being told in a way that benefits Western geopolitical objectives, not out of apathy. In actuality, Burkina Faso's suffering is unnecessary. It does not cleanly fit into the strategic aims or worldview of the West. For the moment, let's set aside our insensitivity and discuss who stands to benefit from a destabilized Burkina Faso. You may be surprised by the response, but it's important to comprehend the underlying dynamics of this battle. First, there are the rebel organizations themselves, which are connected to well-known larger groupings. They are at their best amid anarchy, extending their dominion over others via intimidation and bloodshed. However, they're not operating in a vacuum. A weak Burkina Faso serves the interests of certain unscrupulous groups, such as foreign arms traffickers, dishonest public servants, and even some Western countries that stand to gain from instability. Let's not act gullible. Weapons are being sold, and they are entering West Africa like water. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. No RPGs or AK-47s are made by insurgents. These weapons are purchased from international networks that only care about making money, not promoting peace. So these dealers in death find themselves with a ready market in Burkina Faso's instability. In the meantime, dishonest local and international leaders profit handsomely from the misery of others, both physically and symbolically. The strategic geopolitical interests, however, constitute a further dimension. A destabilized Burkina Faso is seen by certain Western countries as a pawn in a bigger game, a means of containing certain powers or preserving control over resources. Africa's chaos has long provided a useful setting for neo-colonial manipulation. Furthermore, a few regional powers are also interested in the volatility that persists. For example, the conflict benefits certain neighboring countries economically. They are able to defend more military spending due to the turmoil, obtain foreign assistance that may be misdirected toward less honorable purposes. The issue of strategic positioning is another. A country's stature on the world stage can rise if it is perceived as a stabilizing factor amidst upheaval. Furthermore, the struggle for influence in Africa between superpowers has made matters worse. The former colonial power France has substantial interests in the area and has conducted military operations that are purportedly intended to quell insurgencies. But these interventions frequently serve many purposes, such as preserving a presence in a resource-rich area. Conversely, nations like China and Russia are making more and more of an effort to impose their will on Africa via financial and military aid. The proxy wars that follow only make the situation worse by turning Burkina Faso into yet another theater for international power struggles. You now have the responsibility to determine who started this mess. In any case, what does Burkina Faso's anarchy mean for the people living there if outside powers are profiting from it? How does this lethal game catch civilians? At gunpoint, civilians are being made to dig trenches, only to find themselves inside these temporary graves when the gunfire breaks out. In sharp contrast to the polished accounts you may receive, if you see any at all, this is the reality. The West is fond of presenting itself as a beam of liberty and human rights. But when women and children are shot dead in cold blood, and there is no one to help, where are these noble ideals? The humanitarian response from around the world has been dreadfully insufficient. Because of the rising violence and lack of security assurances, aid providers are frequently prevented from reaching those who need them the most. What was the outcome? A populace trapped between merciless armed factions and apathy on the part of the global community. Nevertheless, the Burkinabe people's tenacity is evident despite this gloom. They are survivors rather than just victims. They withstand, they adjust, and they persevere. But without significant backing from the global world, for what length of time can they hold out? The local populations have created their own survival strategies. Self-defense militias consisting of common people who have taken up arms to defend their families and homes have emerged in certain locations. These organizations provide a false sense of security, but they also complicate the situation more. These militias have the potential to quickly turn into aggressors themselves in the absence of adequate supervision and training, feeding the cycle of violence rather than ending it. Furthermore, for many people, moving has become a way of life. Over 1 million people are thought to have been internally displaced in Burkina Faso, moving from place to place and never quite managing to stay one step ahead of the violence, according to UN estimates. Internally displaced people's camps are congested and under-equipped, making it difficult for families to get basic supplies like food, clean water, and medical attention. When foreign aid does come, it is sometimes insufficient, comes slowly, or gets bogged down in bureaucratic red tape, leaving the most vulnerable people on their own. The situation is especially bad for the kids. A generation has been left without an education and with little hope for the future as a result of the violence, which has forced the closure of numerous schools. Due to a lack of options, young people may turn to armed organizations as a way of retaliation or survival, which furthers the cycle of poverty and violence. What can the international community do to support the Burkina Faso people as they struggle for their lives? Are they taking any action at all? Why did no other country speak up when the West chose to overlook this issue? Have they been sealed off? Is the West intentionally causing this? If we are being really honest, the answer is more in favor of the latter. The West enjoys lecturing about democracy and human rights, but they are not very good at acting on their words, particularly when it comes to Africa. Reports and declarations are released by the UN, but where is the peacekeeping force? Where is the decisive step that an insurgent overrun territory needs to bring stability? Let's discuss the hypocrisy of the West. A global outcry followed a wave of insurgent attacks on Europe, leading to the formation of military coalitions and an all-out effort to track down the attackers. In Burkina Faso, though, rapid reaction task forces and emergency summits do not exist. Rather, a lot of finger-pointing and hollow promises are made. Even when humanitarian help does manage to go through, it is frequently mired in red tape and rarely reaches the people who need it most. It seems as though the lives lost in Burkina Faso aren't worth as much, less worthy of an immediate and forceful international reaction. The West pronounces this catastrophe to have been ignored with haste. However, isn't this fire fueled by their negligence? In addition, there's the matter of global priorities. When a crisis threatens the security or economic interests of the West, these nations are fast to deploy resources. However, the urgency wanes if the situation is contained within Africa's boundaries. This has resulted in the international community's lack of significant engagement for Burkina Faso. While the words are present, the deeds are not. Although the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the African Union, AU, have tried to step in, their attempts have been hindered by a lack of funding and political will. Complicating matters further, Western countries frequently ignore these African-led initiatives in favor of their own goals. Furthermore, international non-governmental organizations and relief agencies are frequently put in a challenging situation. They work hard to help people in need, but they also rely on money from governments in the West, which sometimes has conditions. This dynamic produces a convoluted web of interests that frequently lessens the significance of their contributions. What alternatives are there if the world community doesn't step up? What steps may be taken to break the cycle of abuse and neglect? Let's start by discussing accountability. The West needs to own up to its part in Africa's destabilization. This isn't an aid or charity situation. It has to do with accountability. The international community must begin to view African countries as equal partners deserving of the same consideration and care, rather than as afterthoughts. This entails providing genuine assistance, security support, humanitarian relief, business alliances that aren't tied to terms and conditions that favor the interests of the West. Secondly, a forceful international engagement is required to destroy the networks that provide armaments to rebel organizations. Those who make money off of the suffering in Burkina Faso need to face sanctions and punishments. This covers the financial networks that enable these transactions in addition to the arms dealers. Numerous of these networks are known to operate with impunity, shielded by influential backers who have a stake in keeping things as they are. It would take a concerted, multinational effort to take down these networks. Denunciation alone would not be sufficient. Concrete action must be taken. Third, Burkina Faso needs to make a determined effort to enhance local governance and community resilience. This entails giving communities and local leaders the authority to manage their own security and development. Financial infusions alone won't fix a dysfunctional system. Infrastructure and capacity building at the local level have to be a strategic priority. This entails lending a hand to neighborhood organizations, making investments in healthcare and education, and fostering business ventures that offer alternatives to joining armed groups. International organizations also need to reconsider how they provide humanitarian aid in conflict areas such as Burkina Faso. Conventional assistance delivery strategies frequently don't fit the reality of the ground, where security is a continuous worry and access is restricted. It is imperative to develop new models that prioritize adaptability, regional collaboration, and community-driven solutions. It's about switching from a top-down to a more collaborative, context-aware approach that prioritizes the needs of the Burkinabe community. Fourth, there must be a sincere dedication to Burkina Faso's efforts at peacekeeping and reconciliation. Years of violence and mistrust have seriously weakened the social fabric of the nation. It will require time and methodical, intentional work to restore confidence. The main goals of international assistance should be to promote efforts that strengthen social cohesion and unity, assist disarmament and reintegration programs, and facilitate talks between parties involved in conflict. And last, the importance of regional cooperation cannot be emphasized enough. Burkina Faso's problem is not unique. It is a component of a larger instability pattern that the Sahel region is experiencing. With comparable dangers from armed groups, neighboring countries must coordinate their efforts. To spearhead these initiatives, regional organizations such as the African Union and ECOWAS need to be given sufficient authority and funding. Instead of undermining these regional endeavors with unilateral policies that benefit them alone, the West ought to embrace them. As we consider these options, it becomes evident that much more work is required to protect the most vulnerable members of the Burkina Faso community and address the underlying causes of the problem. But can we expect these changes to be brought about by the existing international order? Burkina Faso's problems extends beyond Burkinabe. It is a worldwide mishap. It illustrates a pervasive disparity in the way that human suffering is viewed and dealt with globally. Even if the West still upholds the principles of liberty, democracy, and human rights, its deeds or lack thereof, in Burkina Faso, for example, convey a different tale. Being selectively concerned about human life is not merely insincere. It serves as a sobering reminder of the pressing need for a paradigm change in the way we see and handle crises globally. The agony of Burkina Faso is a litmus test for our humanity as a people. The whole community is being challenged to put aside its own interests and demonstrate genuine solidarity with people who are in need. It's a chance to eschew the patterns of disregard and apathy that have typified much of the West's interactions with Africa. But in order for this to occur, there needs to be an acknowledgement, a time for reflection, and, above all, a will to take action. Burkina Faso's citizens are deserving of more than just sympathy. They merit our response, our camaraderie, and our steadfast assistance. They ought to be acknowledged, heard, and assisted. It is time for everyone to acknowledge this issue and respond to it with real deeds and unwavering commitment, not with hollow words or flimsy show of care. Then and only then can we start to create a new chapter for Burkina Faso, one that is characterized by prosperity, hope, and peace rather than by violence and neglect. It is time to take action. The world has to make a decision. Will it keep ignoring Burkina Faso, or will it at last show support for the country? The decision will determine not just Burkina Faso's destiny, but also the moral fiber of our international society. Is Burkina Faso being pressured by the West to request aid from them? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.